Okay guys, what's up? This is Alan and welcome to me and Derick's channel. Today I'm going to be talking about learned helplessness. I'm kind of nervous to make this video because it's really personal to me, and understanding learned helplessness has helped me a lot with getting over episodes of depression in my own life or just dark headspaces that I've found myself in. So I hope this video can help you out a lot, and I'll just start by giving the definition and then we'll go into some examples. So learned helplessness is a state that occurs after a person has experienced a stressful situation repeatedly. They come to believe that they are unable to control or change the situation, so they no longer try. When people feel that they have no control over their situation, they may begin to behave in a helpless manner. This inaction can lead people to overlook opportunities for relief or change, even when opportunities for change become available. So that pretty much just means that when we fail too many times, we stop looking for ways to stop failing because we just think it's inevitable that we're going to keep failing. This was created by an American psychologist named Martin Seligman. Named Martin Seligman, and he's an American psychologist that used to work at Cornell University. So the reason that this is so personal to me is because in my early 20s, I used to follow a lot of, well, I still do, and I followed a lot of big YouTubers like Ty Lopez and Grant Cardone and Gary Vee and Graham Stephan and Owen Cook and Julian Blanc and Max Berger. And all of these people were like traveling the world, making a lot of money, doing all this really cool stuff. And I dropped out of college when I was 20 years old to try to put myself on the fast track to like become a millionaire and travel the world and do all those things that many of us find ourselves wanting. And I was very unsuccessful. And the subsequent years that followed that experience, I kind of got into like a weird headspace where I felt like I'd never get those things. I felt like it was a dumb thing to want, and I was like, I could feel myself falling into the trap of being like, I'm gonna stop trying to get those things. And I felt like I should just give up and not keep pursuing those things because I'd already tried and failed. And then I read the book Learned Optimism by Martin Seligman, the psychologist that I mentioned earlier, and it changed my life. And I know we always say like it'll change your life, but this one really did help me a lot. Like it really did change my life a lot. And it's just crazy to me looking back on my early 20s and remembering that feeling of thinking that I wouldn't ever get these things and that I wouldn't travel the world and I wouldn't make good money and I wouldn't have freedom. And that was one of the big ones, was just having the freedom to do what I want and make my own schedule and go where I want and be with who I want and just all those things that I really wanted in my early 20s. And I just wish that I had learned about learned helplessness earlier so that I could have had the resilience to keep going and not give up as easily, because giving up probably wasted like 2 years of my life. And that's 2 years I'll never get back. And that's why learned helplessness has really helped me a lot. And for the rest of my life, I'm always going to remember that you're gonna fail a lot, but it really is about like continuing to go even as you fail and making sure that like when I get into negative headspaces, knowing that it's just my brain reacting in a normal way. So we'll get into how you can overcome learned helplessness, what it is, and some examples to tie into and explain really what learned helplessness is next. And I hope that this video helps you guys out a lot because it's really changed my life, and I hope these examples help make it more clear exactly what learned helplessness is. Guys, so whenever I explain learned helplessness, I just use the experiment that actually laid the foundation for the invention of the theory. So When Martin Seligman first invented it, he took a group of 2 dogs, and we'll call them Group A and Group B. Both of these groups were put in cages and shocked every couple of minutes. However, Group A is able to escape the cage that they are in. So when Group A was shocked, they would jump right out of the cage within a few seconds after reacting to being shocked at first. Now Group B was also shocked, but it's impossible for them to escape. So when they were shocked, they would try to get out at first, but when they realized that they couldn't, after about 5 minutes, they would just lay down through the shocks. So how this led to the foundation of understanding what learned helplessness is what they did next. They took these original 2 groups and put them in 2 new cages. And in the new cages, both groups can escape. So predictably, when Group A was shocked, they jumped out of the cage again, just like you would expect. But Group B, and how this relates to learned helplessness, is when they were shocked, even though now they can escape, they don't. So because they learned in the experiment before that when they're shocked, there's nothing they can do about it, they thought going into this one that they wouldn't be able to escape even if they tried, so they stopped trying. And that's what learned helplessness is. It's taking other situations that we've experienced in our life where we felt helpless and applying them into new ones that are not the same situation. So that just means that those dogs, while they could escape, they chose not to because they had learned helplessness. And this applies to humans and animals in the sense that we can experience traumas in our lives and then think that those things are unchangeable and then never try to change them again. And understanding that can help you go beyond learned helplessness and try to be more resilient in the future and make sure that you actually are attempting to change things even when you've failed in the past. Alright guys, so I'm going to go over 3 common examples of learned helplessness just to give a less theoretical or abstract understanding of what this is. So the first one is in the classroom. You'll see a lot of students who aren't doing as well as others, so then they develop the identity that they can't do well in school, so they just completely stop trying. You can see how this can compound over an entire lifespan and really be detrimental in this form of learned helplessness. The next one is social anxiety. So the tricky thing about social anxiety is that if you build an identity around it where you feel like you can never be social or you can never be extroverted, this is a form of learned helplessness that can get worse and worse over time. And because you frame it in that way yourself, others will perceive it in you, and then this effect can compound even more. Because in this example with social anxiety, it's actually you interacting with other people and getting feedback, and then how you're behaving affects how people treat you too, so it can get worse and worse over time. So that would just look like someone feeling like they're not really good at being extroverted, and then they say, I can never be extroverted, so they build a learned helplessness identity around never being able to be social or outgoing, or being able to speak in public, or even being able to speak in front of a camera. And then the last one that really is the most widespread, but doesn't necessarily apply to all of us as much as classroom or social anxiety. I think that's an easy one to understand, and that relates to me, and I know people who that has affected. But this last one is poverty. I grew up in the middle class, so I don't know very many people in poverty other than when I've traveled the world and seen the third world. But in that case, this kind of learned helplessness is the most detrimental. There's a really good book on this called A Framework for Understanding Poverty, and it ties into Martin Seligman's concept of learned helplessness. And he says that when you're in poverty, it can feel like there's no way out, and that feeling is learned helplessness. And the reason that it's so bad in poverty is that this can be passed on from generation to generation, and from an entire cultural perspective, it can be widespread across an entire population. So I would say that kind of learned helplessness is the worst, but I hope that those 3 examples of learned helplessness help you understand what it is a little better and aren't as abstract as that first experiment. Alright guys, so that's all the most common examples of learned helplessness, and that is the end of this video. In conclusion, I'll just end with the solution against learned helplessness, and I actually think I'm going to make an entire video about this, but I'll just cover it briefly right now. So the antidote to learned helplessness is what Martin Seligman cleverly called learned optimism. And he breaks it into 3 parts, and that's personal, pervasive, and permanent. So the antidote to learned helplessness is to make things not personal. So making them personal would look like this. When something bad happens, you say, this happened to me because it's my fault. It's something I did. That's making it personal. But if you're honest with yourself, a lot of the things in the universe are out of our control, and it's honestly narcissistic to believe that we have such an effect on the outcomes of things that happen in our lives. So that's the first thing he says, is to make things not personal. The next thing is to make them not permanent. So anyone who's struggled with learned helplessness like me, one of the biggest things with helplessness is it feels like it's never going to end. And that's what Martin Seligman calls permanence. So the antidote to that is to admit that nothing is permanent. No matter how good something is or how bad something is, everything will come to an end. So nothing in our lives is permanent, and understanding that can help us getting over learned helplessness. So in my own life, when I think of things that are really hard, I always just remind myself, hey man, this isn't permanent, it's going to end. And hey man, it's not personal, it's not always my fault. Now sometimes you have to take a growth mindset and be like, these things are my fault and they are within my internal locus of control, but I just have to be really careful not to be blaming myself too much for things that are out of my control. So those are the first 2, and the last one is pervasiveness. So that just means things that are spread across a spectrum of many domains. So let's say you're not very confident with public speaking. Pervasiveness would be to assume that because you're not good with public speaking, that you're also not good at computer programming. Now that's kind of a stretch, but something that's easier to understand would be like, I'm not good at being extroverted, so now I can't do public speaking. But I know a lot of introverted people that are also really good at public speaking. So pervasiveness is the idea that just because you're bad or good at one thing doesn't mean it's across a spectrum of your entire life. And when we have learned helplessness, a lot of the times we'll think that things are pervasive. We'll be like, oh, I'm such a bad person, so there's no way I could do this. Oh, I was really bad at that in the past, like I couldn't run a mile, so there's no way that I'm gonna be able to get an A in this class. Or back in 9th grade, I couldn't get a good grade in social studies, so there's no way that I'll be able to get a good grade in 10th grade in psychology. That's pervasiveness, and it's applying certain mindsets that are negative from one and applying them into another. And those are the 3 ways that we can help mitigate against learned helplessness. Knowing that things are not pervasive, knowing that things are not permanent, and knowing that things are not personal. And those are the 3 ways that I've used to help myself get over learned helplessness and be a more positive person in general. So I'm gonna end the video right here. I hope that helped you guys a lot. And it really has helped me a lot in my life. And any time I get into dark headspaces, I just think of those 3 things. I'm like, am I blaming myself too much? Am I over-exaggerating how long this is going to last? And am I over-exaggerating how pervasive it is in my life? So those are the 3 antidotes to learned helplessness, and I hope that helps you as much as it's helped me. As always, guys, keep it open-ended. Yeah, all quiet. All right, guys, so that was the end of the video, but I just remembered one last thing I wanted to say about learned helplessness. This is just a really good, simple rule of thumb. A good rule of thumb is remembering that we typically give up right before we're about to succeed. So I'll say that again. A good rule of thumb is that we typically give up right before we are about to succeed. Most of us only have 1 or 2 tries in us before we stop trying over and over. So just remembering that whenever you're about to succeed, you'll feel the most pressure to give up. And learned helplessness says that we normally will only try 1 or 2 times before we give up for good. So understanding that has helped me try over and over beyond just 1 or 2 tries, because most things in life that are worth getting do take, obviously, more than 1 or 2 tries. So like I said, this really is the end now. Keep it open-ended, guys.
Boom.